Hey everybody, thanks for coming back. Please subscribe to the channel. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at loops. So why do we need loops? Well, what loops allow us to do is they allow us to run statements multiple times. So it cuts down on the amount of code we have to write, and also will of course make your code more readable because there's less lines of code. So Python provides us with three types of loops. One's called a while loop, one's called a do while loop, and the other one's called a for loop. The while loop and the do while loop are quite similar. And just one other thing about loops, for the while and do while loop, you have to make a condition to break out of the loop. So this is a flowchart of a while loop. And you can see here that we have some condition. The condition is declared at the beginning of what we call the loop body. And then your condition is evaluated. If your condition evaluates to true, the code in the loop body will execute. And that will continue until the loop condition is false. So let's open up Visual Studio Code and we'll begin. So I created a folder called Python Loops, and within this folder, let's add a file. We'll call it while_loops.py. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare an integer variable, and we're going to use that integer variable value to be compared against to get out of the loop. Okay, so let's do the loop definition, while, put our condition in, and let's go int count less than 10, colon, enter. And we'll just print out the value of this int count variable. And of course, the first time through it's going to be 0. Then what we have to do is we have to increment the int count because that's our condition. Remember, we need to increment the condition or change the condition to eventually break out of a loop. So every time it hits that, it'll just add 1 to it. So first time it goes through, it'll be 0. Then it hits this int count line, and we're going to increment it by 1. Now you could use a shortcut. Instead of writing it out like that, int count plus equals and then a 1, and then every time it hits this line it will add 1 to int count. Let's run this, and let's just scroll up a little bit here so we can see what's going on here. And you can see here 0 through 9, so that's 10 times it looped. So let's change things up a little bit. I'm going to comment out this incrementing of the loop. We'll run the program again, and I don't know if you can tell, but it's blinking down there, and it's just putting out a 0 because we haven't changed the value of int count. To get out of it, I did a Control-C. And because we weren't breaking out of the loop, we created an infinite loop. Okay, so don't forget about that. When we use our while loop, we have to increment the counter, or the condition has to be changed somehow. So just to review, when we use a regular while loop, the condition is evaluated at the beginning of the loop. It's very common to use lists together with loops. So let's take a look. Let's create a list of student names, and we'll start off with John, and then we'll put Sarah, and finally Bill. Okay. So there's our list, and we are going to iterate or loop over that. So let's create our while loop. So while, and the condition is going to be about the same but a little different. Int count less than what? Well, we use the length property of the list. Student names, colon, and print student names. And within here, right, we have to get an index value. Well, let's take advantage of int count, right? It's an integer. And what happens if we tried to run this? We have a problem. We forgot two things. Okay, so that never ran. Why didn't it run? Or the code, the print statement never ran? Because we didn't reset the counter back to 0. So int count has to be set back to 0, right? So in count, assign it a value of 0. And I hope you realize we forgot one other thing too. What else did we forget? I hope you answered incrementing the counter. So let's increment the counter. Plus equals, whoops, don't need that space, equals 1. And let's try and run it now. Okay, there you go. So now you have looped through a list and outputted the results. Awesome. So let's look at a different type of loop. It's called the do-while loop. And this loop, if you take a look at it, the loop body executes first and then a condition is evaluated. So a do-while loop always executes the code in the loop body at least once. And it's up to you to change that condition or to make sure that condition changes so you don't end up in an infinite loop. So let's start coding. Okay, I created another file called do-while loop.py and let's add the condition in. So be condition, let's set it to false for now. And let's start the loop body. So while be condition, and if we just say be condition, that means true. If we don't even have to test for equivalency. And then print I am looping. And then what we need is we need to collect user input. And this user input will be used to break out of the loop, right? Because otherwise we don't have any way to break out of the loop. So user underscore input is equal to, we'll make use of the input function provided by Python, input loop again, and we'll put in parentheses y or n, put a question mark there somewhere, hit enter, and now what we can do is we can test. So if user underscore input double equal sign, test for equality is equal to n, then we can change the loop condition. And we will set the loop condition to false. So when it breaks out of this, it's going to check up top there underneath that while be condition. It's going to be false and this code will not run. Okay, so let's try and run it and let's see what happens here. Oh, it didn't run. Well, the code ran, but we didn't get what we expected. Why is that? What's our condition? While be condition is true. Well, we set it to false initially, so we made a little logical error. And now, here we go. Y, and then n, and you're out of it. In the second while loop example, we went over a list through all the elements. But this for loop in Python is specifically meant to go over lists or collections. So how does it work? Well, it iterates through a collection one by one until you reach the end. And it does it automatically. It's beautiful. Okay, so let's start writing some code and take a look. Okay, so I'm going to add a file to Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to call this for underscore loop.py. Okay, let's open it up. And we can take a... And I'm going to copy and paste that list we used in the while loop example. And let's write out our loop for single underscore student in the list name, student names. Now single student only lives inside of this loop. And it represents one element inside of student names. So print student names. And let's run it. And what do we see? We're going to see all of the elements one by one from the list. In general, you're probably wondering which loop to use in which situation. I like to use while loops when I may or may not need to loop. I use a do while loop when I know I have to loop at least once. And I like to use a for loop when I'm looping over collections. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you soon, and please subscribe to the channel.